Good day to everybody. My name is Arturo Sanchez-Azofeifa, and I am a professor at the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Alberta. And the Office for Sustainability during this week asked me to prepare a short talk on the Sustainable Development Goal 15, Life on Earth. And into that context, I do a lot of work in Latin America in one of the most endangered tropical ecosystems, the tropical dry forest, which is very emblematic to the jaguar that you see in my first presentation. So I wanted to, first of all, talk about the goals. And the second one, objective, is to talk a little bit more about dry forests, because if I talk about dry environments or tropical environments, probably your mind will go to the Amazon and the rainforest and things like that, which in fact is the tropic is more than that. There are the cloud forest, the montane forest, the dry forest, and the cloud forest. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about tropical dry forest. Um, the the key element on the goals, we know that there are 17 goals, and the one that I'm more focused is number 15, that is called life on land. And this main goal, this is how the United Nations have defined the goal, is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainability, sustainable managed forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. And probably by now you have noticed that I have an accent, and the main reason for this is I'm from Costa Rica. And Costa Rica is considered one of the most advanced countries in the world in terms of Sustainable Development Goal 15, because if you look at the country in the 1970s was highly deforested. And today is probably one of the countries with the highest forest cover. Right now, the country has more than 52% of forest cover. And it fits very well in the concept of life on land, because the 25% of the country is protected and the rest is being restored. And believe it or not, Costa Rica has also been a pioneer on sustainable development. Since the late 1980s, Costa Rica was probably the first country in the world that developed a strategy for sustainable development that was embedded into the legislation and other components like the forestry law or the payment for environmental services. So the concept of sustainability that we talked today about SDG 15 has been around for a while in many different forms. And the target is divided into many different components based on the definition, and I'm not going to go over many of them, but for example, this one is the end of the certification and land degradation, and it's probably one of the most important ones. And so you have 9 targets from 15.1 to 15.9, and then they have targets that are more related to the economics of this, because one of the key elements of talking about sustainability is not only that we say, oh, we need to protect this or we need to restore that, but what is the economic incentive that is going to be created? And that's, for example, how the program for payment for environmental services is very important, because you recognize the tangible and intangible contributions of the forest ecosystems of the life in the planet to society. So you put a price to that. So this 15.A, point B, and point C relates to this kind of a financial mechanisms that exist, especially A and B. And the C is more related to poaching and so forth. That is, in fact, one of the most important impacts of human development in forest ecosystems and life on Earth. So let me introduce you to the tropical dry forest, because it's something that people usually don't have a clue that they exist, and people think about this area right here, always in the Amazon. And in fact, tropical dry forests cover a huge part of the Americas, also Southeast Asia and Australia. And basically, in tropical dry forests, the first agreement is that all the trees, more than 50% of the trees must be deciduous. They lose their leaves, and the controlling the leaves is not here like in the boreal regions by temperature and sun hours, but is related to the amount of soil moisture that is available. So in the moment that the forest stop raining, the soil gets dry, and the trees genetically start dropping their leaves and go to sleep. So one of the conditions is that the forests have to be more than 50% of the species must be deciduous. The temperature, the mean temperature has to be at least 25 degrees. So imagine that must be a hot place. And it's also restricted by precipitation. It has to receive more than 700 millimeters and less than 2,000 millimeters per year. But it has to have a drought time, in a time in which doesn't rain at all. In the case of Costa Rica, right here, in this little dot, there doesn't rain in January, February, March, and April. So no rainfall at all. So during that time, you go into the forest, and I will show you some pictures. It looks like a desert, but it's not because the trees are dead, it's because the trees are sleeping. The what do we know about tropical dry forest? And this is a picture of a tree from the dry forest, and these trees are amazing because they sense the rain coming, and when they see changes in humidity and temperature, they actually start putting those leaves, and you can go around the landscape and you find these absolutely beautiful trees with this blossoming, but it hasn't rained yet. They are actually preparing themselves for the rain. So they are genetically designed to sniff these clues from the environment. And in the moment that it rains, they put their leaves very quickly, and the forest gets all full of life. And one of the key elements is the frogs start appearing everywhere and reproducing, and it's just a fantastic show of life on Earth. But unfortunately, we know very little about tropical dry forests. Most of the long-term studies never focus on a rainforest. It's mostly dry forest, mostly rainforest. And also the amount of knowledge that we have in terms of scientific papers. This is a study that one of my PhD students, Margaret Kalaska, right now is a professor at McGill University, did during his PhD. And we found out that the ratio is 1 to 300. What that means that for every 300 scientific papers that we produce from the rainforest, only one paper came out from the dry forest. And you wonder why? Why we having so many little knowledge? It's because the dry forests are not the last frontier for economic development in the tropics, are the first frontier, are the best lands for agriculture, the best lands for human settlements. In fact, when you go and look at all Latin American cultures, like the Chorotegas and the Incas and the Mayas and the Aztecs, they actually flourish in dry forest environments because you have less mosquitoes, less malaria, so you can actually flourish more, and also the soil is more productive. Another thing that is very sad is that at the same time that we see major networks evolving to study rainforests, very few networks study dry forests across the globe or across the Americas. And one of the key elements to look into that is how they respond to phenology. And if you look at here in Alberta, and we have the Phenology network, people go and say, oh, the trees are putting the leaves, so we have flowers, and everybody records. In Latin America, we can do the same thing in the dry forests. And when we have long-time series analysis of this, we can see if the forests are shifting, plus or minus. So do they put the leaves early or late? And then, because they have that period of time when there is no rainfall, we can actually detect if there are impacts on climate change. So the dry forests are not only the first frontier for economic development, but are very strong indicators of the impacts of climate change in tropical environments. They are the first ones that we look at because their signal is very strong from the phenology point of view. And that's the reason why when we look at droughts and stuff like that, we always look at dry forest environments. So unfortunately, and given the impact of these forests, if you look at all the forests left that is dry forest in the Americas, 66% is gone. Really, a lot of it is gone. Why? Because people are planting soybeans, they're developing hotels and golf courses and so forth. They're close to the beach, so they're very attractive to build housing and urban development. So only 66% is gone. Now, or what we say converted to other land cover types. And if you look at this 40% left, or 34% left, only 4.5% is protected. So the rest is fair game. So the fight is not only to stop deforestation or restoration, but the fight is also in protecting it through national parks, biological reserves, and so forth. But when you try to do this, you always get a lot of pushback because they want to develop that land. And in Brazil, for example, in the state of Minas Gerais, there are very little forest left. We have the largest perimeter of irrigated land in the world, and it's located in dry forest. And what they do that is they produce tomatoes and they produce peppers and they produce bananas and so forth. So I always joke in the sense that when we have climate change, we're going to have a lot of effects, but also we're going to have a salsa crisis because a lot of the potato, the onions and the peppers and the tomatoes come from these regions, and then we're going to have problems with the production, and then they're going to come the salsa crisis that everybody will be aware of. So, bottom line from this is, guys, is that the dry forest is highly affected, highly deforested, highly fragmented, and not much protected at all. The largest protected is in Costa Rica right now. This is how the dry forest look like for those who have never seen it. The top is how it looks during the rainy season, and in the bottom is how it looks during the dry season. So this one first, A and B, is what we call early forest, that the farmers have abandoned the land and the forest is coming back. So you can see you have a few twigs there, and all the trees, almost 100% of the trees are deciduous. Then this is an intermediate forest that is 10 to 30 years old in terms of restoration or secondary growth. And you can see that there are more like two layers of forest. In here we have one layer, and here we have two layers, like the top of the trees and these bushes. And again, a lot of the trees are deciduous. And this is how it looks, a forest in all we call more than 50 years old, and this is how it looks in the dry season. Now, if you tend to go to Latin America in the rainy season, you drive by Guanacaste or Brazil or Mexico rainforest region, you may see a lot of things like that, and you can say, oh, look at this, it's like farmland and cattle ranching and stuff like that, but in fact it's an early forest. This is one that we call more like a charal. It's an area that is coming back, but it's not quite yet. And then you come back and the people tell you, usually tell you, oh, this is a dry forest. And you can say, how can this be possible? Well, come back into the dry season and you will see why we call it a dry forest. These trees here are not dead, they are sleeping. When we look at what it has in tropical dry forests, these are the key elements that relate to SDG 16. This is what people is interested on this. We look at almost 600 scientific papers published, and we look at key variables, and we use this kind of software that allows us to see what is coming out more relevantly. And you can see the concept about carbon stocks, species diversity, land, life on land, habitat disturbance, life on land, fragmentation and forest recovery, life on land. So the science has been steadily moving into that direction to trying to provide information to decision making. And the question is, what kind of life do we have there? So let me show you some of the animals of the dry forest. Believe it or not, a lot of monkeys, capuchin monkeys, like these guys right there, troops, and there have been studied a lot by Linda Finnegan in the University of Calgary. for many, many years in the Guanacaste Conservation Area, and how they return to the forest once the restoration starts. They have troops and they have different names and alpha males called Darth Vader, and they follow them all over the place. Then we have the spider monkeys, and we have giraffes. Believe it or not, savannas and dry forests are very close together, so this considered elements. Now, the emblematic top member of the dry forest is this guy, the jaguar. This is the man in the dry forest. This is the top predator. He eats everybody underneath, monkeys, turtles, everything. So that's what we are very happy to find out when some of the areas that we work. If you look at how these places were in 1971 in Costa Rica, they were pasture lands, they were farmlands. Right now, you go there, and well, you're not going to find a giraffe, but you're going to find a jaguar or a puma. So this is just fantastic. It tells us that the life on Earth is coming back. The resilience of tropical dry forests is very important. And this is how these trees look like. This is a tree from Madagascar, but there are very similar trees in Brazil. And this is a deciduous tree. And it's very interesting. There are deciduous trees that are competitive. So a lot of them may lose their leaves during the dry season, but other ones put their leaves in the dry season and drop them during the rainy season because they compete with the other guys. So this is one guy there that perhaps is not, is what we call inverse phenology. And because of competition, drops their leaves in the wet season and put them in the dry season. So there's no competition, he can grow. And this is some of the flower trees that we see all over the place. Massive. You look at the mountains, sometimes they look yellow or white or purple. And it's just the flowering of this. Now, this is what happened with the land transformations in tropical dry forests. If you look at when the Spaniards came and the early settlers, they have these forests, agriculture comes in, and then, like in the case of Costa Rica, people say, well, we have better education, I don't want to crop anymore, there is no production from the farm, and the government say, okay, come and says, I'm gonna give you $50 for every hectare of forest that you protect. But the only condition is that you can never touch it again. Remember, to restore, to protect. So they say, okay, I have 10 hectares, well, $500 is better than what I'm getting here. So I'm going to abandon the land and the growth comes back, as I told you before. So after 50 years, we come back to these systems. Now, this process is not linear. It takes a long time. The species die and come back. And also something that is very important is that it depends on the management practice for the restoration of the forest. The forests have two ways to come back in the dry forest. So this is, for example, an early forest, an intermediate forest, and a late forest. Basically, what you see right here is an increase in species composition and biodiversity. But at the same time, these trees are absorbing carbon, they're getting new species, and what we call primary productivity, or the capacity to grow over time, is increasing. Now, the key word on this is carbon, biodiversity, and productivity. In other words, ecosystem services. That's what important. What is so important is the, and remember 15A and 15B, the economic mechanisms to make this possible. So we recognize that these forests are giving us tangible and intangible. What it means by tangible, you go into the forest and say, wow, look at this, I can see this bird, or I can see this animal. So you can see it, you can touch it. But intangible is climate regulation, carbon sequestration, better quality of air, all these different elements that are related to 15A and 15B that can give us a sense of how these things come back. Now, in the dry forest, the key element is control the fires. If you control fires that are usually induced because people think that they have to burn their pasture land before the rainy season to actually have more better the cows can get fatter. So they burn, and these fires get out of control and burn the forest. So Dan Jansen in 1986 says, let's control it. And the second thing is that some species are returning by, let's say, a coyote ate the seed of a tree 2 kilometers and come back to another area, defecates there, the tree is there, and boom, comes back. Or by wind. Some trees disperse their seeds by wind. So there are intrinsic mechanisms on how we actually play with the restoration of forests. It's not just go there and plant trees. We have to let nature do their work. So this is an example of things that happen here. As you can see, biologic diversity, as biologic diversity increase, meaning efficiency, then we have ecosystem services increasing in terms of carbon storage. So that's what I was talking. 15A and 15B are aimed to promote this curve by means of economic incentives. So this can help a lot in climate change, ecosystem reductions, control deforestation, and so forth. It's a lot of elements that deal with education and what I call, what in Costa Rica is called bioalfabetización, is bioeducation, that you teach the kids in their little about this, the importance of promoting this kind of growth by educating them in the schools, and they take it into the park, working in the dry forest, show them how the animals and so forth. So they are growing with this desire of conservation. So we can have all these areas and everything, but if we don't educate people to actually realize of the importance of this, and there are financial mechanisms to promote this, these SDGs are just paper. Now, also being asked to talk about the impact of climate change in dry forests. So this is one of the models that we get in dry forests. There are two main impacts that we're going to see. First of all, I want to be clear that not all the impacts are the same depending on where you are. If you are north of the equator, the dry forest behave different than south of the equator. But what we can basically see is that there is going to be in droughts and higher temperature, and also a reduction in precipitation. Now, remember that depends on where you are. Okay, this is very, very important. But how do we know that? If we look at time series of satellites collected since the year 1985 until today, we can actually look at the phenology, and we can actually apply mathematical algorithms to that satellite data. And that mathematical algorithms help us to understand how these forests across the Americas. So we can see that the forests north of the equator are increasing productivity, are actually producing more carbon, are actually increasing biodiversity and so forth. Meanwhile, south of the equator are actually getting into droughts. And this is the main area this is an area right here, in this area of dry forest. In that area alone, it's like 60 million people living. So imagine the impact of having a reduction of forest and rainfall and increase in temperature in these regions right here in Brazil. So basically what you're going to have to see is movement, migrations. So we start talking about not migrants for wars, but environmental migrants. And that this is a concept that people start looking into right now, sociologists, and how these migrations occur. And it's just not the migrations will occur because of socioeconomic elements, but also just driven by climate change. It's going to be more relevant in South America than in North America. Now, how are we studying this? We have been working on a network that is called Tropidry. And I am the director of the network, and we have a bunch of countries from different parts of the world participating, people that are very interested in this. And our main goal is to develop knowledge that policymakers can use to better manage, restore, and protect tropical dry forests into the context of the SDG 15. And one of the things that I mentioned before is the education. When we started this project in 1998, and then we got funding in 2006 by the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. There were very few people in Latin America that work in dry forests, and one of the things that is more satisfying is that right now we have training over 350 graduate students for all the Americas in dry forest ecosystems. And our main goal was the development of the next generation of tropical dry forest scientists. And we have been very happy that these elements, and you can go into tropidry.org and find more about us. And finally, I think that when we look at what we do here at the U of A and other parts of the world, but especially at the U of A, our main goal is to support policymaking in tropical dry forest regions. And we use advanced remote sensing technologies, ecological knowledge, human development, and human dimensions of this, and how how this links, and how can we actually, by via observations in the ground and from the space, we can actually make a better policy, or at least to support them. And I think that has been very productive to us over the last 15 years. With that, I want to thank everybody for your time, and I really appreciate it very much. And hopefully you learn a little bit more about dry forest and how the SDG 15 is actually implemented. And this is one of the things that the United Nations wants. They want to know how this is being implemented. And this is a clear example of how a sustainable development goal has an implementation to science, to policy, and to human dimensions. Thank you very much.